You arrive 12 minutes late, and before anyone even asks, you're already explaining the traffic, the parking, the phone call that ran long, the exact sequence of events that led to this moment, delivered in more detail than anyone actually requested. You declined an invitation, and the no came wrapped in 3 paragraphs of justification, context, and reassurance, as if a simple no might not be believed on its own. You have noticed this about yourself? The words pour out before you've decided to say them, a defense mounted for a case no one has actually made against you. Why does a simple, reasonable choice so often require an entire trial's worth of evidence before you feel safe stating it? Overexplaining looks from the outside like thoroughness or courtesy, but underneath it often sits something far more specific, a nervous system convinced that an explanation offered in advance is the only thing standing between you and someone else's judgment. Welcome back to Milky Way Psychology. Today, we are going to break down the psychology of over-explaining yourself, where this habit comes from, what it's actually trying to prevent, and how to finally let a simple statement be enough.
Stay until the end, because the final piece, where this pattern actually starts to loosen.
Have you ever noticed that your explanations tend to arrive before anyone has actually challenged you? Psychologists describe this as a form of anticipatory justification, providing reasoning in advance of criticism that hasn't occurred yet as a way of managing an anxiety about judgment before it has any chance to materialize. This means the extra sentences aren't really for the other person. They're for the version of this conversation your mind has already rehearsed, the one where you get challenged, disbelieved, or found lacking, even though in reality, that version of the conversation is rarely the one that actually happens. If you grew up in an environment where a simple no or I don't want to was met with pushback, interrogation, or disappointment, you likely learned that brevity wasn't safe, that only a sufficiently thorough justification could end the conversation without conflict. Psychologists connect this pattern to learned appeasement behavior, a response shaped by environments where minimizing potential conflict required extra reassurance or explanation. Over-explaining in this light isn't a communication quirk. It's a strategy that once worked. If a short answer used to invite pushback and a long, detailed one used to end it, your nervous system learned exactly which approach kept things calm, and it has likely been running that same strategy ever since, regardless of whether the current situation actually requires it. Underneath many over-explained sentences sits an attempt to manage the listener's interpretation before they have the chance to form their own. Psychologists describe this broader behavior as impression management, a concept developed by sociologist Erving Goffman, describing the ways people consciously and unconsciously try to influence how others perceive them. The extra detail isn't really about the facts. It's an attempt to close every possible gap where a negative interpretation could sneak in to leave no room for the listener to think anything other than exactly what you intended them to think. Because an unmanaged interpretation feels to an anxious mind dangerously unpredictable. And this leads to the fourth mechanism. Because mind this focused on managing perception is often also carrying a quiet fear about what happens if that management fails. At the center of most over-explaining is a specific fear that without enough context you will be misread, seen as rude, unreliable, selfish, or careless when none of that is actually true. Psychologists sometimes connect this to elevated rejection sensitivity, a heightened tendency to anxiously expect, readily perceive, and intensely react to rejection or negative judgment from others. For a mind wired this way, a short answer feels like a risk because a short answer leaves room for misinterpretation, and misinterpretation feels dangerously close to rejection. Over-explaining becomes a way of controlling for that risk, even though in most ordinary situations, the risk was never as large as it felt. Have you noticed that your over-explaining intensifies specifically around moments of declining, disagreeing, or asking for something? This connects to conditional positive regard, a concept in developmental psychology describing environments where approval depends on meeting expectations rather than being freely given. If your early environment linked worth to compliance, then any deviation from that, a no, a boundary, a differing opinion, can trigger a felt need to justify your right to deviate at all. The over-explaining in these moments isn't really about the specific request. It's an unconscious attempt to prove that you're still a good, reasonable, acceptable person, despite doing something that some part of you still associates with risking disapproval. Here's the part that rarely gets said clearly. Over-explaining usually doesn't produce the reassurance it's chasing. Listeners often register excessive justification as a subtle signal of uncertainty, which can actually undermine the confidence and credibility of the original statement. Communication researchers sometimes refer to this as credibility dilution, the effect where excessive qualification and justification weaken the perceived strength of an otherwise clear statement. The irony is significant. The exact strategy built to prevent doubt often introduces doubt where there wasn't any to begin with. A confident "I can't make it" is usually received better than the same sentence followed by 4 additional sentences justifying it. Put these 6 mechanisms together: the preemptive defense against imagined pushback, the early lesson that brevity wasn't safe, the attempt to manage perception before it forms, the fear of being misjudged, the guilt attached to having needs at all, and the way over-explaining can quietly undermine the very credibility it's trying to protect, and the pattern finally makes sense. You were never simply a thorough communicator. You were a person who learned, likely very early, that a short answer wasn't safe to give, and you built, out of necessity, an elaborate system for making sure it never had to be tested. That system made sense once, but most of the rooms you walk into now are not the rooms that taught you this lesson, and a simple, unexplained answer is very often not only sufficient, it's actually more convincing than the elaborate one you've been offering instead. If you have ever caught yourself justifying a completely reasonable choice as if it were a crime, understand this. You are not annoying, and you are not alone in this. Your over-explaining was never proof that your reasons weren't good enough. It was proof of a nervous system that learned, somewhere along the way, that simple answers used to invite conflict. You are allowed to say no without a paragraph behind it. You are allowed to trust that your reasons are enough, even unspoken. And you are allowed, finally, to let a short sentence be a complete one. Thank you for spending this time with Milky Way Psychology. If you've ever caught yourself over-explaining something that never needed defending, share your story in the comments. You are far from alone in this. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if this video helped you see this pattern a little more clearly. Until next time, goodbye.